Good afternoon, everyone. It's me, Maloxat, senior teacher at Oregon State University. So, dear students, today at our lesson, we will speak about methods and approaches in teaching English as a foreign language. Approaches, methods, procedures, and techniques. So, dear students, let's start first with approach. What is approach? So this refers to theories about the nature of language and the language learning that serve as the source of practices and principles in language teaching. It offers a model of language competence. An approach describes how people acquire their knowledge of their language and makes statements about conditions which will promote successful language learning. Method. A method is the practical realization of an approach. Methods include various procedures and techniques as part of their standard fare. Procedure. A procedure is an ordered sequence of techniques. A procedure is a sequence which can be described in terms such as first you do this, then you do that. Smaller than a method and bigger than technique. Technique. A common technique when using video material is called silent viewing. This is where the teacher plays the video with no sound. Silent viewing is a single activity rather than a sequence, and as such as a technique rather than a whole procedure. A term that is also used in discussions about teaching is model, used to describe typical procedures, usually for teachers in training. Such models offer abstractions of these procedures designed to guide teaching practice. The grammar translation method. This is a method that has been used by language teachers for many years. At one time, it was called classical method, since it was first used in the teaching of the classical languages, Latin and Greek. Early in this century, it was used for the purpose of helping students read and appreciate foreign language literature. Classes are taught in the student's mother tongue, with little active use of the target language. Vocabulary is taught in the form of isolated word lists. Elaborate explanations of grammar are always provided. Reading of difficult texts is begun early in the course of study. Little attention is paid to the content of texts, which are treated as exercises in grammatical analysis. Audiolingualism. Audiolingual methodology owes its existence to the behaviorist models of learning using the stimulus-response reinforcement model. It attempts through a continuous process of such positive reinforcement to engender good habits in language learners. Audiolingualism relied heavily on drills like substitution to form these habits. Habit-forming drills have remained popular among teachers and students and teachers who feel confident with the linguistic restriction of such procedures. Presentation, practice, and production. A variation on audiolingualism in British-based teaching and elsewhere in the procedure most often referred to as PPP, which stands for presentation, practice, and production. In this procedure, the teacher introduces a situation which contextualizes the language to be taught. The students now practice the language using accurate reproduction techniques such as choral repetition, individual repetition, and cue response drills. PPP and alternatives to PPP. The PPP procedure came under a sustained attack in the 1990s. Michael Levis suggested that PPP was inadequate because it reflected neither the nature of the language nor the nature of learning. Jim Scriven advanced what is perhaps the most worrying aspect of PPP, the fact that it only describes one kind of lesson. It is inadequate as a general proposal concerning approaches to language in the classroom. In response to this criticism, many people have offered variations on PPP and the alternative to it. ARC, OHE, ESA. ARC, put forward by Jim Scrivener, stands for authentic use, restricted use, and clarification and focus. Communicative activity will demonstrate authentic use. Elicited dialogue or guided writing will provoke restricted use of language by students. Finally, clarification language is that which the teacher and students use to explain grammar, give examples, analyze errors, elicit or repeat things. OHE. Michael Levis claims that students should be allowed to observe, read or listen to language which will then provoke them to hypotheses about how the language works before going on to the experiment on the basis of that hypothesis. ESA. In the ESA model, 3 components will usually be present in any teaching sequence, whether 5, 50, or 100 minutes. E stands for engage. Students have to be engaged emotionally. S stands for study. A stands for activate. Any stage at which students are encouraged to use all and or any of the language they know. The communicative approach. The communicative approach or communicative language teaching, CLT, is the name which was given to a set of beliefs which included not only a re-examination of what aspects of language to teach, but also a shift in emphasis on how to teach. Non-communicative activities and communicative activities. In non-communicative activities, no communicative desire, no communicative purpose, form, not content, one language item only, teacher intervention, materials control. But vice versa of it, in communicative activities, a desire to communicate, a communicative purpose, content, not form, variety of language, no teacher intervention, no materials control. Task-based learning, or TBL, popularized by Prof. who speculated that students were likely to learn language if they were thinking about a non-linguistic problem. 3 basic stages of TBL according to Jane Willis. The first one, pre-task, introduction to topic and task. The second one is task cycle, task, planning, and report. And the third one is language focus, analysis, and practice. These methods developed in the 1970s and 1980s as humanistic approaches to remove psychological barriers to learning. First, community language learning. And this, students sitting in a circle, a counselor or a knower, making the utterance. The second one is the silent way. The teacher says as little as possible, interacting with physical objects, especially with culinary rods. The next one is total physical response, or TPR. The originator of TPR, James Ussher, worked from the premise that second language learning could have similar developmental patterns to that of child acquisition. Children learn language from their speech through the forms of commands. Then adults will learn best in that way too. In responding to commands, students get a lot of comprehensible input, and in performing physical actions, they seem to echo the claims of neuro-linguistic programming that certain people benefit greatly from kinesthetic activity. Humanistic teaching. Humanistic teaching has found a greater acceptance at the level of procedures and activities, in which students are encouraged to make use of their own lives and feelings in the classroom. Such exercises have a long history and owe much to a work from 1970s called Caring and Sharing in the Foreign Language Classroom by Gertrude Moskowitz, in which many activities are designed to make students feel good and remember happy times while at the same time they practice grammar items. For example, when I was a child, my favorite food was hamburger. Or when I was a child, my favorite relative was my uncle. I was shown to crawl, how to crawl. I pushed out of my mother's womb, and etc. The lexical approach. The lexical approach discussed by Dave Willis and popularized by the writer Michael Lewis is based on the assertion that language doesn't consist of traditional grammar and vocabulary, but also of phrases, collocations, and idioms. A lexical approach would steer us towards the teaching of phrases which show words in combination. Thus, instead of teaching will for the future, we might instead have students focus on its use in a series of archetypal utterances such as I'll give you a ring. Methods and culture, a mismatch between teacher intention and the learner interpretation. Our attitudes to the language and to the way it is taught reflect cultural biases and the beliefs about how we should communicate and how we should educate each other. Many of the approaches and teaching methods are based on a very Western idea of what constitutes good learning. For example, American teachers working in other countries sometimes complain that their students have nothing to say when in fact it is not an issue of the students' intelligence, knowledge, or creativity which makes them reluctant to communicate, but their educational culture. Teachers need to understand student wants and expectations just as much as they are determined to push their own methodological beliefs. Discussion. Making choices. Exposure to language. Students need constant exposure to language since this is a key component of language acquisition. Input. Students need comprehensible input, but this is not enough in itself. They need some opportunity for noticing or consciousness raising to help students remember language facts. CLT, communicative activities and task-based teaching offer real learning benefits. The affective variable. Anxiety needs to be lowered for learning to take place. Discovery, where culturally appropriate students should be encouraged to discover things for themselves. Pair work closure. What seems to work in English classes will depend upon the age and character type of learners, their cultural backgrounds, and the level they are studying at. Not to mention the teacher's own beliefs and preferences. So, dear students, this is the end of our today's lesson. Revise the learned material and be ready for the next time. Goodbye.